Okay, we're going to start with Louise, and I keep saying the name wrong my entire life, so XL, right? Do you go by Pettit too?
I do.
I didn't know that, see? That's happened. You would be Shelley Denham back in the day. David Pettit's wife. Do you guys all know David Pettit, famous black and white photographer? And color, but I like his black and white, sorry. Anyhow, some people can have a talent to do certain means of art that other people don't. And I'm sure grateful we have a lot of artists in this town. We're going to turn the time over to Louise, and if you remember from last month, Louise is a sister to Shirley, and the parents were Austin and Helen Excel, and they were both mayors of this town at one time. So we're going to turn the time over to you.
Thanks, everybody. It's nice to be here, and what a good crowd. I didn't know what to expect, but I'm glad to see people of all ages here, all kinds of generations. So when Chris asked me to do this, she said you have 15 minutes to talk about 160 years of history. And I said, good luck. So I couldn't figure out for a long time if I was going to talk about like the discovery of Springdale and the original settlement, if I was going to talk about things that I lived or what. So this is a really rushed little presentation that's going to do 160 years. So I have, first of all, let me say. Oh, sorry. There you go. I have to acknowledge a couple of individuals first, and I want to say a little bit about history. I always go back to a couple of sources when I talk about Springdale's history and the history of Zion Canyon. I always go back to J.L. Crawford, and I also cherish this little book, which is A Brief History of Zion Canyon in Springdale to 1947, written by Nancy Crawford and Irwin Fairbanks, and self-published by I think the Crawford family. I'll have to look. Gifford family, that's right. Nancy and Merwin and J.L. were not professional historians or academic historians, but they were absolute treasures and so important to the history of Springdale and this canyon. I want to say that people like these are so important to the community because from my perspective, there is the history that is researched and documented by academicians and by professional historians, and then there's the lived history. And from my point of view, the lived history is so much more important than the academic history. It's the history that comes alive when you read it, and that's, I think, so important. So this community is losing its amateur historians rapidly. A couple of them are in this room and ought to be cherished as community treasures. Get their oral histories, get their stories before it's too late. We've already lost so many, and they are so important to this community. So that's enough about that. But think about your neighbors who have the lived history of your community that goes back. The little book by Nancy Crawford and Merwin Fairbanks ends in 1947. That was the year I was born. And I've always thought maybe I ought to write the history of Springdale and Zion Canyon from 1947 on. But I think I'm going to leave that to somebody in the next generation. So you historians out there, start keeping track of these stories of your life. So the picture that I have up here is a photograph by C.R. Savage, who was, his works, most of them now are in the BYU archives. And this is a picture of what he called Little Zion Valley from 1870. I just wanted to show you. The documentation of this canyon goes back a very long way. So the settlement I like to think of as roughly from about 1863 to 1930. This is Springdale about 1935, and this is one of J.L. Crawford's photographs that he shared with me a long time ago for another, when he was still living, for another project. But I think it's also archived with Janet's family. This is a beautiful shot. I'm not exactly where. I think that's the big turn by what is now, just where the bank and the might be. It might be a little further up the canyon. Can anybody say? By the shelf? Yes. That's exactly where I thought it was too. It was a sweet little village about 1935. We got electricity in Springdale not even 100 years ago. Can you imagine? It was 1927 when the first power line came into town. And I was here when the first telephone came into town in people's houses. So it's been less than 70 years since we had telephones in our houses. And my family shared a party line with Virginia and West Tennant.
I'm sorry.
So this is going to be kind of a mishmash of pictures that I had in my personal collection. Do you want to go? Okay, here's, of course, the building of Zion. These are CCC workers on the road, on the Mount Carmel Tunnel Highway. I just will flip through some of these. We've been preserving history around here for a long time. When the initial LDS chapel in Springdale burned down in 1929, it was a long, hard slog to rebuild the chapel. It was, they started building in the early 30s. I think it was dedicated in 1935 or 36. And the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers raised the money and constructed the little monument that is still standing on what is now the Pizza Noodle. If you haven't stopped and looked at it, stop and look at it. It talks a little bit about Nephi Johnson and the discovery of the canyon in 1858. I want to go to the next one because it's another shot of the same monument. That's my dad, Austin Excel. He was the mayor of Springdale at the time. This is Springdale Centennial in 1963, and that was Bishop Alvin Hardy by that same monument, and it's still there today. Stop and see it. I can't remember for sure if this is Olson Camp or Allred Camp. That's Olson's Camp, okay. About 1932, this was located right where the Best Western is now. So you can see we've changed a little bit over the years, but isn't that a lovely spot? You can just imagine how nice it would have been to motor in there and stay. This was my grandpa Dewey Excel's little business that he opened in 1934 called the West Temple Coffee Shop. After World War II, when my dad returned to, I'm sure his dad and my dad, our dad, came back to Springdale after the war with his young bride. He and our Aunt Denise Clark, took over the coffee shop, and soon its name became the Canyon Inn. And there it is, the Canyon Inn. That's my parents in 1946. I think probably about that time, Mom would have been pregnant with me because I was born in January of 1947. So we've been a part of the, I guess, tourism industry in Springdale for quite some time. This is John Dratter's Zion Rest Motel. You know it now as Flanagan's. This was a great one of the early motels in town. I think he also came into town in the mid-1940s and started his business. He moved here from Price and settled his family here. And here is downtown Springdale. I'm not exactly sure of this date, but this is a Canyon Inn. That's the street looking up towards the park, so you're looking up past the post office, past what is now the Desert Pearl, past the Best Western. And this, the Conoco service station was where Dick Barnes had his old service station. And one of the greatest memories of my life was sitting on my grandparents' lawn across the street from this location, and Dick would open up the bay of his garage, and in the evenings, he and his fellow musicians would get together, and the sounds of the mandolin and the instruments that they put together in a little ad hoc band was just heaven to hear. I still can hear that music. And here's Springdale, another shot years later as it becomes a gateway village to a national park and begins to welcome tourists. And I guess you know where it is now. I have a couple of old photos that I love. This one I got from Janet. This is a beautiful picture of Ledessa and Elva, Janet's mom and her aunt. And they were dressed up. I adore this picture. Dressed up to celebrate some pioneer event in Springdale. And I just want to say that's one of the things I've loved about Springdale is what an amazing community this was for gathering and celebrating events. Parades, oh, we used to have parades. They're nothing now, nothing. Here's a couple of photos and examples. Just run through these if you will. There's the old Springdale fire truck. And just some other pictures that I have in my stock. I love this picture because it represents some people who are no longer with us, who are really, really important. There's Raleigh. I believe this is the dedication of this church. It's of the groundbreaking, not the dedication. The groundbreaking of this church. Raleigh and my mom, who was the mayor at the time, and Leon Lewis, and I think that's his state presidency. I think it's Garth Last and Jim Lemon were there, and 4 of those 5 people are no longer with us. I've run out of time, so let's see. Oh, it was wonderful growing up in Springdale. You can't do this today, but it used to be. You used to stop in the middle of the street and get your picture taken, and not risk your life. I have one last thing I just want to share with you. They said I have 2 minutes. I'm really ripping through this. Okay, so about those parades. In 1977, we had a 24th of July parade, a Pioneer Day parade parade. We used to have huge parades in Springdale. And I have, it made the lifestyle section of the Los Angeles Times with photographs and a wonderful story about the kinds of parades we used to have in Springdale. And I just want to read one little paragraph. It says, a lot of names you'll recognize in here. Mike Smith. Bobby Chamberlain, Patsy Graves. It took this is the writer from the Los Angeles Times. It took an hour for the parade to move through town. The biggest segment of the parade were the 36 cars and 11 campers and trailers caught at the end as they came out of Zion National Park. How much further are they going? Motorists kept shouting to the townspeople. After the parade, everybody went up the hill behind the Latter-day Saints Church to Pioneer Cemetery, where the women of the Lions Club unveiled a bronze plaque mounted on a red sandstone rock with the legend in memory of the Springdale, Utah pioneers who rest here. Shortly before sundown, Dan Winder, 72, and the men of the community removed the dirt and tin covering from a whole beef buried 24 hours earlier over apple and cherry tree coals for the annual town barbecue. The third largest parade in the nation takes place today as part of the Days of 47 celebration in Salt Lake City, featuring 60 floats, 25 bands, and hundreds of horse units and marchers as the capital city recalls its pioneer heritage. Springdale's parade was a far cry from Salt Lake City's, but it was in the same spirit of the biggest birthday celebration of any 50 states. Is that great? I'll leave this if any of you would like to look at it. I'd like to have it back, but it's kind of fun to look at. There are people in there you'll recognize. So thank you very much.
We'll ask questions in a minute, too. If anybody has questions, anybody have anything for Louise? All right, we're going to wait. This is Sharon Young. No, we're not related. But there's three of us in here today. Anyhow, Sharon is she's the daughter of, it's Clint and Alva Rouch. Sorry, Twitchell. I told you I'm losing it. Well, you know what they say about everybody marrying everybody else. I'm just kidding. But Alva is a Crawford, correct? There we go. So anyhow, keep track of all these names.
Better than me.
I'm going to give a little history of what brought my family to Springdale before I describe what Springdale was like when I was growing up. My great-grandparents, William Robinson Crawford and Cornelia Gifford Crawford, purchased land in the canyon beyond Springdale in the early 1900s, land that is now Zion National Park. 11 of their 13 children lived to adulthood and received an inheritance of land. Their mailing address was Oak Creek Ranch. My parents and grandparents lived on that ranch. The U.S. government forced the families to sell their land to the government. Homes, barns, sheds, fences, and trees were removed. Most of the families bought land in Springdale and rebuilt their homes and farms. A small section of the Crawford land was not taken by the government at that time. Years passed, grandchildren grew up building homes and farms on this land. They were considered part of Springdale, but were referred to as living across the river. The government decided to expand Zion National Park. Once again, families had to move, leaving homes and farms behind. at that time had many orchards and pastures. Cattle was allowed to graze on the early spring grass along the side of Highway 9 from just beyond where Gifford Park is for 2 or 3 miles out of town. Hollyhocks grew along the ditch here and there and were loaded with black bumblebees. A very gentle bee that never did sting Loretta Bean or me as we caught them in bottles and released them over and over again. The post office was inside of Alvin Hardy's mercantile store until 1949, when an addition was built on the outside of the store for it. Wes Hardy was the contractor, and the 2 teenagers that helped him was my brother Thane Twitchell, age 16, and O.R. Johnson, age 15. The neighborhood I grew up in was at the south end of town. During the summer days, the women often sat on Grandma Mary's porch to shell peas or break green beans for canning. Many evenings, neighbors would gather on grandmother's porch to visit while the children played games on the lawn. We played dare base, pump pump pull away, and here comes the bloody Irishman seeking for a trade. This was a wonderful world for a child to grow up in.
All right. Any introduction?
This little lovely lady is Marion Callister. Callister, how do you say it? Callister. All right. She is the daughter of my good friend, Della Higley, and Elmer Higley. And trying to figure out who everybody was related to, talking to her mom. This book right here came in really handy so I could identify people. Have you looked at that book ever? Anyhow, I'm going to turn the time over to her, and she's going to tell us about her mother's life. Right?
A little bit. Before the Park Service came in and made the move out of the canyon, they lived as Sharon said, up in the canyon a ways. And coming down through the canyon to where the road is, they would turn to the right and come on down into Springdale. But before they did that, there was a hill that they called Clear Hill. And the kids would take boards, climb to the top of it, and slide down Clear Hill for fun. And they did this daily. My mother told me about Clear Hill, and her father was a Crawford, and his father and my grandfather and great-grandfather were carpenters, and they helped build the cabinets in the temple down in St. George. I've got a couple of the cabinets that they built in my home right now, and they're really special to me. They were very industrialist people, and they helped each other a lot. The community was more than just people that knew each other. They were people that were related, if not by name, by heart. The ladies took drugs and the Madsons sold them at their store. When I was very little, my first inside bathroom was in my grandma and grandpa's house. When we visited, we went to the springs below the grandpa's house and went in the water. That's where they baptized people, was in that little spring. It was next to the river, and they made ice near West Temple Mountain. And they would store the ice in a cave, and then they would have ice cream during the summer. And that was fun. Sharon's family lived next door to my grandfather, James Crawford, who after his wife, Pauline, died, married Sharon's grandma, even though she was related to me anyway. And Grandma Ellen was, well, the last time, when I had heard, she was from Texas, but I guess she was from somewhere else before Texas. Anyway, she raised my mother and her little brother Paul. He was a soldier in the Second World War, and he was a veteran, the veterans were given a job in the park, and my dad helped build the tunnel as a driver. And he wasn't the only one. I think every man in town worked, helping to build that road up and through the tunnel. My grandpa helped build the temple and the cabinets in the temple and the tabernacle. His father also worked on the temple, and I told you that. Hiram Rouch was a cabinet maker. I had 2 cabinets made, and I told you about that. The old graveyard was up on one of the hills beside the old church. And I remember that old church. We used to have our summer get-togethers out in the parking area, and they would pass the food through the window of that old church, and that's how we would fix our food and everything there in the old church area. That old church now is, I guess, a pizza parlor or something. Well, always good food. And that, I guess, is all I have to say. Who's next?
Well, hang on. Tell me, your spring that you were talking about, is that the spring that we know of behind Springdale Suites? Where was the spring you were talking about?
The spring I'm talking about was down,
The one up in the park by the
no, this spring was one down by my grandfather's house.
Okay, so, and then,
And it's there's a big motel or hotel something there now.
so also the cave that you got hit ice in, I thought there was a cave up behind where Jack Burns' house was. That's where
Yes.
they did the cave.
Yes.
Devil's what?
Devil's Tower or what?
Devil's
Tower.
Devil's backyard?
Backyard.
Devil's backyard.
Okay.
And then one other question for you.
What did you call your grandma that raised your mother? What was her name?
And Ellen.
Ellen.
Okay, that's right.
It
Okay,
was
sorry.
an
I was thinking
Ellen.
of your mother's birth mom.
My
Okay.
mother's birth mom.
She died when Paula was born. She was told not to have any more children, and she went ahead and had Paula, and it took her life.
Any other questions? Come on.
Well, it's kind of for everyone. So there's
Okay.
a very famous picture in Zion of the Crawford Arch,
Yes.
and there's a man standing on
I have
the
one.
Crawford Arch.
It'll be up coming, isn't it on our thing?
Oh, okay. Am I jumping the gun? Are you getting to that? I wondered if it was related to.
Oh, it's coming.
It's
And you'll understand when you find out more, because when you find out who the relative is, you'll know.
Okay.
Shelley's gonna get up. I I had the sisters, as we all know them as, Betsy and Janice, Roselle, but Alford and Khalees, their name now. But anyhow, they wrote me something up and Shelley's going to present it, and I didn't think anybody else should do it but her, because she's kind of special to them.
I love her.
I told you I didn't do this. Okay, so I know this is Janice's writing because of some of the remarks that you will catch. It says to take a look at growing up in Springdale some 60 odd years ago. She really needs more than that. You have to step through a time warp and imagine it being a bit past the time of Tom Sawyer. The world was out there, but the mountains had us surrounded enough to keep us from feeling that we were part of it, except during those summer months when there was an influx of tourists coming to see our beautiful park. There was no TV. The highlight of our week was waking up on Saturday morning, gathering around the radio and listening to Let's Pretend before tackling Mother's list of things to do. We thought Cream of Wheat song was the #1 on the hit parade. When we finally did get TV reception, it never captured the magic of radio and the excitement of listening to programs like Amos and Andy, The Jack Benny Show, The Green Hornet. And I can still hear that squeaking door that told us it was time for the inner sanctum. We lived in a town filled with moms and dads and uncles and aunts. Blood relationship meant absolutely nothing. The boss was the parent of the household we were at during that time. We always felt welcome in every house in town and could often be found playing games in the yards of those homes, whether the bosses had children of their own or not. Holidays were always a reason for excitement, and we had special ways of celebrating each one. On Valentine's Day, we always made Valentines at school to be exchanged during the day. Then in the evening, we would leave additional Valentines at the doorsteps of special people in our lives. They always involved putting the Valentine on the doorstep, ringing the doorbell, and then running off so the recipient would never know who had left it. We celebrated May 1st by choosing a May Queen and braiding the maypole, which always was a sign that summer was near. Then there was the 4th and 24th of July celebrations. On those days, we were always awakened by a blast of dynamite about 6 in the morning. We had breakfast at the school or the church, and the rest of the day was filled with a parade, games, and lots of food. There were fireworks in the evening, usually provided by the Dennetts across the street. On Halloween, all the kids would go together and go trick-for-treating. It was never trick or treat. We were almost always invited into homes where we would perform our cute little tricks, and only then would we be given a treat. Some of the older kids usually found time to perform a little mischief, like putting the signs in front of Allred's Cafe, well, that's where the Pioneer is now, on top of the building, and then leaving the owner to figure a way how to get him down. One of the special events that took place in our 6th year at Springdale Elementary School, and which was almost considered a rite of passage, was the decoration of the underground passage in the school at Halloween. Our class was the last to participate in this exciting event. Betsy, to this day, accuses us of messing it up so badly that we ruined it for everyone else. I, however, am sure that it was because we did such a fantastic job of scaring everyone that no one else could ever hope to meet our level of excellence, and they wanted to end the tradition on a high note. Christmas was always our favorite holiday. The Roselle family was always up and moving by 3 a.m. We would open our packages and head out the door by 3:30 or 4 with our favorite presents. We would stop by any house which had its lights on and go in to watch that family open their presents. We would gather up kids as we went along until we became a huge group and drop in on the late risers to watch them. We always went to Ethel and Dewey Exel's house last. They never got up before 5 or 6. And they always made Gary eat breakfast before he could open his presents. So we were all usually gathered around encouraging them to hurry. I think perhaps this could have been one of the times we almost wore out our welcome. Gary Exel, who is Louise and Shirley's uncle, was married to Warda Lewis's sister. In those days, there was no such thing as pasteurized milk. Uncle John and Aunt Lizzie had milk cows, and one of our chores was to go pick it up in the evenings. We would meet a few of the kids also picking up milk, and we would take time to play some of our favorite games, like Kick the Can, Ante I Over, and Run Sheepy Run. Mom and Dad never questioned why we took so long. Those games were played in yards all over town. Sometimes the townspeople, adults and kids, would meet at the school in the early evenings where we would play while the adults talked and the women did needlework. I remember after primary we used to gather in the recreation hall in the old church house where Coralie Allen would give us dance instructions. On special occasions, the Coxes and the Dennetts would be there to help us out. We were all in awe when we got that special treat of watching Alma and Angie Cox or Wes and Virginia Dennett dance. We just knew there was no way we would ever be that good. Dances in those days were a big part of our lives, and they were for everyone. The Giffords played music for most of them. The Golden Green Ball was always a highlight. We had Halloween dances where everyone would dress up. I remember one Halloween, Dad and Dewey Exel were out of town, so Mom and Ethel decided to dress up and go to the dance together. They put big, huge pumpkins over their heads and draped themselves with sheets and vines. No one ever had a clue who they really were. During the summer, we always had dances with the Giffords playing, of course, on the tennis courts. Kids of all ages in town were friends and worked and played together, probably because we were so far away from the real civilization. For work, we would pick cherries and peaches in the local orchards, and we would also pile into wagons and ride to Grafton to pick strawberries. I think every kid in town worked at Allred's Cafe doing dishes. We lived so close that Mr. Allred could look out his door, and while we were out playing, he would call for us to come over and help. We tried to hide sometimes or pretend to be sick, but Mom always told us not to be lazy and would shoo us off. When I first started doing dishes for him, I had to stand on a milk carton to reach the sink. And who could ever forget the summer that the Madsons came to town? The adults and children alike were all invited to go up to Grandma's kitchen, which is now the Bumbleberry, and learn to tool leather and copper and make all different kinds of crafts. Mother made a beautiful rug of the great white throne, which still hangs in our living room. For play, besides playing games, our entertainment included things like hay rides up past Oak Creek Canyon in Zion to the pond for picnics in the summer and for ice skating in the winter. Of course, none of us ever had skates, but that didn't really matter. We had bonfires and weenie roasts down by the river. Garth Justet, Betty G. Bradbury's cousin, used to bring his guitar, and we would sit around the fire and sing. He had a beautiful voice and taught us lots of good country western songs. I remember all of our school days with fondness. It seems, however, that I developed a very undeserved reputation as being rather mischievous, while Betsy was thought to be the sweet, loving one of the family. In actuality, it was just the opposite. Most of our school field trips consisted of a trip back into the mountains. We loved packing our lunch and eating it full of sand and rocks wherever we were hiking. However, the adults who were along had to watch the rowdy ones who would sneak off to go farther back in the mountains than anyone else. I think it was Betsy and one of our cousins who persuaded me to come along with them and see how high up the mountain we could climb. Unfortunately, we got ledged up and didn't make it back home until very late. We were thoroughly disciplined both at home and at school the next day. I could never figure out why they thought that I was the ringleader. We also looked forward to being in the upper grades 5th through 6th, and one of the reasons was Mr. Hanson. He was a great storyteller and always put on a musical production. In 6th grade, he performed the opera Hansel and Gretel. I'm sure it was a much abbreviated version. Jared Madsen had a beautiful soprano voice and of course played Hansel. Betsy was one of the angels watching over Hansel and Gretel, and yes, you're right, I played the part of the Wicked Witch. I remember being so traumatized by it that my mom would paint my hair with shoe polish and then dump flour all over it. I was sure it was all going to fall out when we washed it. One of the best things about growing up here was that the park was our playground. We hiked in the summer with all the tourists and in the winter when no one else was around. We would spend time at the Temple of Sinawava in the evenings and hike the riverside walk in the moonlight. We thought of the Mount Carmel Tunnel as our playground and ran through its pitch black darkness holding hands, playing hide and seek, and occasionally enjoying a watermelon bust. Growing up in Springdale had to be the most idyllic situation anyone could have, and Betsy and I treasure our memories. The world would be a better place if there was a spot for each child to spend their growing up years as we did. I see it through my time work as a little bit of paradise.
I want you to know I worked on those ladies to get that to me, and it was so important that Janice was quite frustrated the day before she moved because she was trying to get those kids to email it to me, which I got a couple days later, so I'm grateful. We're going to turn the time over to Sister Michelle Rouch, who all of us mostly know her dad as Bill Rouch or William Rouch. One day at the motel, I had somebody come and ask me if I knew a ruined Rouch. And like, the only person I could think of would have been her father, but he never went by Bill when he was younger. He only went by Ruin. So she's going to tell us a little bit of her dad's memories.
Dad and Janice were the same age, almost. Dad always gave Janice a hard time because Janice was older than he was by 2 weeks. So that was our running joke at our house whenever we had him for dinner or for anything. Dad was kind of starting to get his memories mixed up now, and so I went back to the memories that we had heard while we were growing up, because we came back every summer for 3 weeks. Until I was about 12 when my grandmother died, and we didn't come anymore for a lot of years until Mom and Dad moved back. My grandfather had a cattle ranch up on the east side of Zion, and they had a home in the park, and when the government came in, they told Grandpa that he could take and quarry the sandstone out of the park to build our house. So the stone house that's across from Hoodoo's is the sandstone from the park. And then as they were building the house was finished in 1931, or started in 31 and finished in 35, I think. But as they were building it up, you can see before Michael put the shelves up in the basement, there were chisel marks on the stone where you could see where they had chiseled the sandstone. And I begged them, they said, please don't cover that up. Oh, we have to, it's too cold. So it's covered up again. But, so my grandfather was known throughout Springdale as a great horseman. He could lead a team of horses through the tunnel at night with no problems. Although he would have one of the kids go in front of the horses as they were going down through the tunnel. And Dad said that as the horses were coming through, the hoof sounds got so loud that they'd start running because they thought the horses were right on them. And so he said that Grandpa would holler at them to slow down, the horses don't need to go that fast. And Dad tells stories of as they were building the house and they were taking some of the stone down through the canyon and to where the house is, that his sisters, who are mostly older than he is, would walk around the edge as the house started to build up. And Grandma would always tell the girls, get down, you're gonna fall down. So up until it was about 6 feet from off the ground, the girls would spend the days walking around the edge as they built, and were having fun doing it. My dad was born and raised in the home. He didn't think that there was a world outside of Zion National Park. He would go to holiday dinners to Grandma and Grandpa Crawford's house, where all the cousins, aunts, uncles, everybody would meet and then sit at long tables. And he tells the story of one of his next to his uncles. And Dad says, or they said, pie's ready for dessert. And Dad said, I can't eat anymore. And his uncle bounced him up and down 3 or 4 times and said, okay, go eat, get your pie. And then they would round up all the kids and they would climb the Watchman. Every holiday, Christmas, Thanksgiving, whatever, they would climb the Watchman and then come back in the evening and then have some more pie. And then they'd go home and sleep. As he was growing up, and I always found this was so funny, they had a pig up on the ranch before they sold the ranch. And Grandpa was out sawing ice in the pond to take down the hill to down here. And Grandpa told Dad to go feed the pig. Well, Dad was scared to death of that pig because it had chased him a couple of times. So Dad tried to corner the pig in the pig pen and then feed him and get back to the porch before the pig got out again. But the pig always chased him back to the porch. And so Dad would run up, and this was before Dad's youngest sister was born, and they still had a little boy named Morris. And so Dad would go and hide behind Morris, and Morris would just giggle. Because Morris was only about 5, 6 months old at that time. So Dad would go running and hide behind Morris. For a while, Grandpa worked on Cable Mountain, pulling the logs down the mountain for building. And one day it got hooked up, and they tried from both ends to get it unhooked. And so Grandpa just kind of slithered down the cable to where it was hooked up and got it untangled, and he just came on down sitting on that log. And so Grandpa was known to just, whatever needed to be done, he would do. He could shoe a horse better than anybody around. And so when Grandpa died and we were going through one of the cabins that was on the property, we found all these horseshoes. And so we were asking John Orland, who's Dad's older brother, why all those horseshoes were in the cabin. And he said, because Grandpa used to shoe all the horses in town. They'd bring the horses over and he'd shoe all the horses. My grandfather was well known for his ability to work with horses and the ability to get a team of horses to do whatever haul they needed to do. And I can remember Grandpa telling me a story that I don't even remember who it was at the time. It was one of his brothers. Could not get his horses to go. He had quite the load, but he couldn't get the horses to go. And he kept yelling at him, and Grandpa would say, don't yell at him, just tell him to go. And he says, well, then you come do it. So Grandpa got on the seat and quietly talked to the horses, and they went. And so Grandpa became quite known for his ability to work with the horses. And he also, like most of the men in town, worked on the tunnel and on the stone bridges and stuff throughout the park. My grandfather was very well known for service, and he was not in the best of health, but there were many fields throughout town that when the government needed onion seed, for what reason I don't know, he would plant all these fields around town and then have Dad and his brothers and sisters help get the onion seed and then go sell them in St. George. That trip to St. George took 3 days. Because they would go down past Leeds, I'm not sure where, but he says they went past Leeds and then went down and around, but he says it was a 3-day trip. And so they didn't get to go very often, which is why Dad didn't think the world existed outside of Zion National Park until he was 7 or 8 years old, because he never went on these trips. This was Dad's whole world. And then one day all the kids were going to school, and little Morris wanted to go with the kids to school. He was only 2, but he was ready to go to school. And so when he couldn't go, he was out playing in the backyard by the ditch with his little truck. And Grandma quit watching him for just a split second, and Morris fell in the ditch and drowned. And as far as we know, Morris is the only child who's drowned in the ditch. So Dad was once again the youngest child. My dad hated being the youngest child. And then a few years after that, he had his little sister born, Lucy. Many of you probably have heard of Lucy, but Lucy was the apple of her mama and daddy's eyes and could basically do no wrong. So Lucy became Dad's little playmate, and he thoroughly loved the fact that he was no longer the youngest child. He remembers the dances. He said he could remember his older sister Clara getting all dressed up and going to the dances. And then he said he could remember his Jessie and Karen and all of them grew up. He says he was never really that interested, but he'd go to play with the other kids that would be there, but he didn't want to go to dance. He had many friends that he considered best friends. Greg Brockmeyer was his absolute favorite friend. And Greg Brockmeyer spent almost every day at Mom and Dad's house. And his mom would say at the end of the night, honey, go get Greg from the Rouches. Because Greg would just come over and he would help Dad do his chores and then they would play. And then he would stay for dinner. And then they'd stay for whatever was going on that evening until his dad would come get him to go home for bed. I don't know how many of you remember Gerald Schieffer, but that was another one of his absolute best friends. Lucy Schieffer is the one who gave the land for the chapel here. And so when my dad was called to be bishop in Trona, California, Gerald Schieffer was the stake president over our stake. So they used to kid each other on telling stories and to the kids and telling them, this is something you should not do. Like they said before, the kids were everybody's kids. If you were at somebody else's house, their parents were the boss and you followed directions. If you didn't, you took the consequences when you got home. Dad said there were many days that he had consequences that he would rather not had. Somebody talked about Nancy. She was a teacher, and my dad had her for 3 years. My dad had to repeat a couple of grades, and so he had her for 3 years. And by the second time she had it, she says, here's what's going to happen. And so all through that summer, Dad would go to Aunt Nancy's for reading lessons because my dad hated to read. There was just too many other things more important to do than to sit down and read. So Aunt Nancy became an important person to my dad. My dad, when he was a teenager, went to work for the park system. He was a dishwasher for a while. Then he started working because his older brothers were the chefs. And he worked for both of his older brothers at different times. And he worked for his sister, who was a pastry chef. I don't know how many of you do that with Clara. Clara was a pastry chef for the park system for many, many years. And he loved growing up here. They would play baseball in the street. If a car came, they'd look at it kind of funny, move out of the way, and then go back to playing their game. But he did have a lot of hard work. They milked cows. My grandpa had an 1.5 acres of garden that had to be weeded. And Dad was one of the ones that was in charge of helping to weed that garden. But my dad this was always home. Even though we spent 35 years out of Utah, this was always home. And that was kind of instilled in me that this was home. And so when I retired from teaching in Vegas, I moved up to take care of Mom and Dad, and this is home to me now too.
So Michelle, I did not know Clara as the pastry chef, but I knew her as the postmistress when I worked at the lodge.
Yes, she was postmistress when I worked at Bryce Canyon.
She is also a very talented painter. I have one of her blades in our house. We're going to turn the time over to my notorious brother-in-law, named Don Dennett. Don is the son of West and Virginia Dennett, and this is his poor little sister. I mean,
That was 18 when I came along.
Oh my gosh.
It was a surprise when she was born. It was a surprise when she was born. All of a sudden, Mom was pregnant, and I was a senior. And my sister, Shelley, was 2 years younger than me.
No, Ginger.
Ginger was. Anyway, I'll get the names mixed up. But I brought a couple of things. My dad made, because we didn't have a lot of things when I was growing up. And my dad made everything up to the mic. Anyway, my dad made everything. So over there is a wheel, and it sharpens stuff. You want to sharpen your knife, it sharpens it in a flash. And it goes backwards and forwards on that. And it's broken, and I got to get it fixed. One of the pedals is broken. And then next to it is a hay fork. And we used to haul hay on this piece of ground. Uncle Arnold owned it before Schieffer's. Anyway, so we had hay, and we would, on a wagon and a horse, we didn't have cars and all of that. You know, but my grandma did have a car, an old Buick. And we would have it, we were tromping, Dan and I was tromping hay. And there would be 4 sticks on the wagon, and they would throw the hay on, and then we'd walk around it to hold the hay on the wagon. And then when you get up to Effie Rouch, who's Arnold's mother, Arnold Rouch, we'd have that. It was on like a derrick and a crane, and that would drop on the hay on the wagon, and it would pick it up, you know, and swing it over and stick it on the stack. That's what that is. And this little chair was made by Arnold Rouch. And when I was in primary, that's what we sat on that chair in primary. And that was in the old church up here. And when they got rid of all that, they closed that down, we ended up with one of the chairs from my mom and dad. What's that? You sat on? We sat on them on there. And that's what it was in primary. Now, I wanted to, before she starts this program, what I wanted to do with Shelley, and I want to thank my wife. And Shelley, because they're the ones who got all the stuff together. Tell me. Because a lot of times I can't remember all the names, you know. I was born in 1943, but I'm only still 35. You know. Anyway, so she put all the stuff together, and she knows most of the names. And all of these displays right here, Carolee put them together. And Shelley got this put together. But when I first want to start, everybody in town was the same. We were all poor, but we didn't know it. We had no clue that we was poor. And we had a house down where I used to live where the motel is. And we had 4 rooms. We had a bedroom, and in the middle was a storage room. And then we had a front room and a kitchen. That was what we had. We did not have indoor toilets and a bathroom. We didn't have a bathroom. It wasn't there. And later, Dad built the bathroom in the middle. And 2 girls slept in that one. Shelley wasn't there. You know, she was younger. And Mom and Dad had one, and we slept on the couches. That was it. And we had no TV, no telephone. Like you said, we had a party line when it finally came into town. And you could pick it up and listen to whoever's talking on the line. You know, whoever was on it. And we had no TV, no telephone. And we had an outhouse out back. And that was a one-holer. And if you went to Grandma's, the garage was out there. she had another bathroom, and it was a two-holer. You could sit side by side if you wanted somebody there. And it was a two-holer. And then, the best part of it is, the toilet paper we used was Sears and Roebuck catalog. That's what it was, believe it or not. But you just read the catalog and then tear off a piece, you know, whenever you're done. And that's what we did. And Dad, when we were born, my dad worked as a truck driver. Then the war came, and Dad couldn't join the war because you're talking about dynamite up and down the towns, because I remember what they said, you'd go up and down the town and throw out dynamite and wake up on the 4th of July. And he picked up some dynamite caps, and it blew off his fingers. The thumb was mostly gone, and the finger was partly gone. And they wouldn't take him in the war. And so he worked for the Park Service to support his family. And he was the maintenance guy in the park. And knew all of that. He was over all the water and all the houses to do all the maintenance. And we were always running around. And we were the best little kids. Twins. And that's my twin, us over there. And you can see which one's which if you want. But anyway, as I put my glasses on. So anyway, we slept on the couch. Now on Saturday, like we said, there was a program on. We had a radio, and in the morning until 9 o'clock. There was suspense stories and all that on the radio. And at 9 o'clock, my dad would be yelling at us, get out here and work on the farm. I mean, it's work time. So we did. And then, when I got a little bit older, I went to work for the Echells at Driftwood Lodge. Now, the Echells actually owned that one that she was talking about, Louise was talking about. And then Mundy's built the Driftwood Lodge. And they ended up trading places, so Echells ended up with the restaurant and motel. And when I first started to work, I worked for Driftwood Lodge. And I was making 15 cents an hour. And then I went to work for Dratters, which was a picture, Sinbad Dratters, in their gas station. It was a Texaco. And I was making 25 cents. And then I went to work for Harlan Winter at the Phillips 66, is where the fire station is, for 25 cents. We used to pick up pop bottles up and down the roads, and Howard Firm, which was a market up at the other end of town, we got a penny a bottle. And so we would trade them in, and we'd get a penny, and we were rich. But pop was 10 cents, and a candy bar was 5. So we were rich all the time. And Mom would sell milk to the Olsons for 15 or 25 cents, and that's how Mom got the extra spending money for what she wanted to do. And she worked for Driftwood Lodge, and she worked for All Reds a few times, and it was like 10 cents an hour. So that's kind of what it was. And Mom and Dad taught dance on a school tennis court, and all the lodge kids come down to learn dance, and we did that. So, and then the LDS church is the old church that's up in town, and at the bottom of the stairs on that, there's a fountain, and that's where we were baptized in that baptismal font. That's where it was. But then, and like Louise said, I played all over this town. I mean, everywhere. And I was telling, you can't tell this in 15 minutes, but every spot, I'm telling you, every literal spot in this town, there's a story. And it doesn't matter where it is, because Dan and I did it. And it was there. And on the old schoolhouse, and we'll see a picture of it, you can climb up the tree in the summertime when school is closed, and there's a big round thing on top of that, and you could climb down through that. And in the first row on the left, there was a hole in the wall, and there was a pipe going down it, and you can climb down the pipe and get into school. We never did anything. We could just get in it if we wanted. But we didn't. Well, we did, but we didn't do anything.
Betsy and Dad did, so you didn't have to do it.
Yeah.
And then a couple of facts we got to get here quick. The park was in 1860. William Howard Taft made it a monument. 1919, it was a national park. Springdale was settled in 1863. In 1820, there was 3,692 people come to the park. In 1930, it was 55,000. In 1879, it was the first post office. Cable Mountain was known for lightnings on the mountain, and lightning struck it, and two people were killed. And on the Great White Throne, that's when it burned off when we were little kids. And I kept thinking, maybe I didn't remember that, I'm just making it up. But it was verified, it happened, and I could see the flames. And Dad would put the fires out as the logs rolled off the mountain. The Lady Mountain, there was a trail up Lady Mountain. I don't know if any of you, most of you knew that. And Dad had to go up and fix anybody that picked up the people that were dead that fell off Lady Mountain. And he was in the maintenance thing, and anybody that got killed up there, Dad was usually the first one on the scene. There's a museum. The lodge had a pool. I don't know if some of you knew that. And we'd go swim in it because my dad was a park person and worked in there, and we got in free. And then we played across from our house in the river. That's how we played all the time. And then there was a museum as you come up in the park. Right as you turn that corner to go up to the canyon, there was a museum on that there, and we always went up there and saw the animals and stuff in the museum. And the jailhouse here in town was made in 1930, and it closed in 1935. No one stayed in it. They did that. One person, as you read the books on there, one person almost made it, but they didn't. And Walter Rouch was the first park custodian, and that's Betsy and Janice's grandfather.
My dad said.
Yes, okay. Now I want to start the movie with the
My dad
picture.
said that he slept one night in the old jail because he was drunk.
Is that right? and they're like talking about the tunnel. I went through that tunnel a lot, back and forth, you know. Okay, let's get that started.
It is.
Is it? I can't see that. Yeah, this is Howard Firm's where we got pennies, chained it in there, and that's across from. And I was talking about movies. Right across the street, we used to watch movies on this. There was a back of the kind of a hamburger place type thing with ice cream. They had a movie theater, and we sat on the hill.
Where Thai Sapa is now.
Yeah, Thai Sapa. Yeah, that's right. What?
Tell them that these are before and after pictures. This are the
Oh yes. Oh yeah. The pictures, they're saying what it was before and now what it is. So I can't see what they are.
Dratters.
Yeah, that's Dratters. When I worked for Dratters, and the gas station was right over there. And this was the chicken coops. It was built up the canyon by
The City Park Road.
yeah, going up the City Park Road by the City Hall. Oh yeah, El Saruch's. El Saruch's.
You can't see this?
And that's across from Dratters. Yeah.
Well, I can see them.
I'm standing in the way. What? Okay.
All right, there we go.
Okay, and that's Bill Rouch's house.
Before it had the block walls on it.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
However, this is Bill Rouch.
Yeah, okay. And these are some of the pictures that was there.
Clara Coat,
Yeah, you want to tell them what it is?
Michelle.
Okay.
This is Clara.
Yeah, in the pink.
No, that was Veda. This is Clara. And then this is John Orland. That's my dad. This was the cabin where we found all the horseshoes. This is Lucy. She was the youngest one.
But Jesse's on there.
Yep.
Jessie Lee.
Jesse's
right there.
Yeah, right here. And then this is my Aunt Karen. She's always 19. You ask her how old she is, she's 19.
But isn't Veda on there?
Veda's right here.
Okay.
No, Veda's right here. And then this is Howard and Susan Rouch were their parents.
Okay, go ahead. And that was and now that's Canyon Ranch.
But now
is
it's
what
the
it
Best
was.
Western.
Yeah, it's Best Western. And that's looking up the town, up the road. And that's down by Blondie's, where it was. It always was. And that was the Excellence.
Right there.
That's the crane and that. And pushed straight it over for Driftwood Lodge. And that's where it is now.
This is Rita Roselle, Betsy and Janice's
And
mom, and that's the house they grew up in.
Yeah, that's the one they grew up in. And they always used to come to our place and played on the lawn out in front of our house until it was dark.
This is our house.
And that one on the left is my mother.
This is my mom right here. Not Dawn's, just mine.
That's it. Yeah.
We did this last night. Carol Lee was teasing us about her. And now it's the La Quinta.
And that's Marilla Morris, Walt Rouch's house.
Aunt Marilla.
Yeah, Marilla. And that's the shop.
This is all red.
And that was all right when I first started. And there's cabins, and one time, I guess I should tell a bad story. One time he had that there, the tourist was in there. And we were such good kids, and they were eating, and we ran around the back, behind Dan, and flipped the circuit breaker. And he knew it was us, but I don't know how. But he just kept saying, I know you did it. And that's Hardy's Market. Okay.
And the post office.
Yeah, and the post office.
Post office was in that little place where they combined it.
After.
Yeah.
And that's what it looks like now.
Yep.
This is when the dailies.
Yeah, the Dailies, I don't know if you knew it, there used to be a grandma's kitchen, and you'll see pictures of that. And then before that, there was a road that went down the side of it, and there was a big barn down there. And the Dailies used to come up, and they were put on plays. Don't let them. Put plays in that barn, and it was a circle theater. And Dan was always going with Martha. And
Frances Johnson's sister.
yeah, Frances Johnson's. And one day, I went to the lodge, and this girl says to me, this lady's waiting for Dan to come and pick her up. And I knew he was out with Martha. So I went in his place. It was a nice date. And she kept saying, what's wrong with your arm okay? I said, right now. And this is the old church, the first church.
Wait.
They did that all the
Neither
time.
one of them would ever talk to either one of them again when they.
Oh, that's right. She
Yeah,
never wanted us again.
the girls would never talk to him.
Anyway, this is the original church when they built it, and it burnt down. And then this is the second church that they built. And it burned down. And then they built this church.
Okay, now we go into old people.
Stand in front.
Okay, this is Alfred Twitchell.
Wait, take the mic.
Oh, here. You got it.
This is Alfred Twitchell. This is Vicki Heaton, only she was a Cope. This is Marion, right?
Shelley, stand this way and put your arm out. There you go.
How am I feeling this?
That works better. Thank you.
This is Nellie Ballard.
Okay.
Ladenza. Manila Campbell, who is Mavis's mom. This is Mavis. Here's Melanie's little brother and sister. This is Grace Firm Walkland. What did you say her first name? Winder.
Yeah, her name was
This is
Linda.
Frances Johnson. This is Lawana.
And that's
Oh, did she? Okay. I was gonna say, Luana had a big black fur hat that she wore, and that was Luana's hat. This is Colleen Hatch, she was married to Jerry's brother. This is Alma Young. Did we decide who this was? Ruby Crawford?
I think so.
This is Sylvia Gifford. Sylvia used to walk the town and collect news and then publish it.
I remember that when I was little.
Alta DeMille, Mary Jane DeMille, Elsa Rouch, Ellen DeMille, Mrs. Hamilton, Elaine. I have no idea who this is. Cannot come up with the name. Did you guys ever come up with the name? Okay, this is Della Hardy, Fern Crawford. You said this was who? Bean? Maggie Bean?
Maggie Bean.
Okay. This is Daisy Ballard here, Wilda Smith, Stan's mom, Judy Roselle, Clara Cope, and the rest are history because none of us can remember.
Shelley, was that just out in front of the church? Like
In front of the church.
one day?
But like my mom's not there, there's a lot of people that aren't. And we weren't a Rockville Springdale ward back then, so I'm not sure what the gathering was because Rockville's in there.
And Rockville and Springdale didn't like each other very much.
Have I run out of time?
How much more you got?
Not very
Keep
good.
going.
This is your,
This is the old schoolhouse, and this one on top is where we could crawl down through. And the hole in the wall was right there, but it had plywood over it. We could just take it off.
he never went to school during the week. I don't know why he called in after.
And this is the tennis court.
This is my dad, not Don, it's just my dad.
Right. And that's where we used to do the dances, where they had the dances all the time. And they taught square dance. My mom and dad taught square dance and a regular dance. And the lodge people came down to it.
This is the jail.
Yep.
It's still there, just like that.
Where is that?
It's right by the school. Right in,
Behind Myrna,
behind Oscar's.
The playground for the school?
Yeah. This is the start of the
Oh,
Bumbleberry.
yeah, this is the one. Oh, that's,
This is Frances Johnson and her 3 girls right there.
yeah. And that's in the ditch, and the water used to flow through that ditch. And that old rocking lady back and forth, and it would dump water, and do that. And we played in this ditch on the other side where Al and them have the motel.
Yeah.
We played that. That was more fun than anything.
Carol Lee said this is what the Bumbleberry looked like when they moved here.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. It was called Grandma's.
No.
It was Bumbleberry back then.
Well, first it was Grandma's kitchen.
And now this doesn't look like this either because they have a brand new building.
Yeah.
This is the Shell station.
Yep.
This is the driftwood. And you go to your
And that's Cable Mountain, and they're building it. And my dad just took us up there, and there wasn't much left up there. And down on top, that guy on top of the bridge is my older brother,
Is that the
Tyrone.
one with Tyrone?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And handkerchief.
My dad took us, a photographer wanted to go up, and Dad took us up, and you gotta go through the tunnel, and then come back, and then there's a place you have to go up by the switchbacks, and if you're not careful, you'll fall down and end up on the switchback. And you have to climb up a crevice, and then go up there, and Tyrone and Dan and I and my dad and the photographer, and that was Tyrone.
And they made it into a postcard, and he's waving a red bandana in the postcard picture. But I don't know. This is the lodge,
Yeah,
first
That's
lodge.
changed a lot.
and that's
Well,
the
it burned
fire
down.
when it was burning down, the lodge burned down. And that's the new one,
That now looks like this.
yeah.
No swimming.
This is the museum.
That's the museum. The road was in front of it where the turn is, there by the bridge.
This is Crawfordville that they
Yeah.
talked about in the park. And that's where you turn up to go into the big barn was by where you turn in to go up to the maintenance yard, but a lot of the houses were across the river also.
Is that
Well-
Oak Grove then?
Before that, it was right on the road.
Now, you went to the
Oak
Crawfords,
Oak Creek.
and then you went Next farm was the Dennett farm, Joe Dennett, and then the Schieffer farm was above that. And then they all ended up moving out of the park.
This is his hay days.
And when we did the wagon, Arnold Rouch would get a whole lot of garbage, and the dump was up by City Hall. And he'd go up there with a load of stuff, and he'd come back with more than he hauled up. And that, every load.
This is when they bored the tunnel.
Yep.
Look at the steam shovel.
This is the start of the switchbacks when the CC camps. And I think they're right there
There's a CC camp.
on the big band up in the park.
Second switchback, you guys.
And there's the other side.
That's coming out.
Yeah.
This is my Aunt Lucy when they
Dedicated the park.
dedicated the
Tunnel.
park.
The tunnel.
That's it.
Is that it?
I think so.
Okay?
That's it.
We got, sorry.
There's one more thing that said, you know where the behind the motel down here, the Spring Hill Motel, the new one? There's a pond there. And that whole area, when I was young, was a swamp. It was a swamp. I mean, it was old dead limbs. And we used to go down, and there was lots of green and black frogs. And we used to slam them on the head with a stick, and then we'd take them out and cut their legs off. Actually cut the legs, and use needing those pliers and peel the legs. And we'd cook them in a pan and eat them. And we did that, but Mom wouldn't let us cook them in the house. We had to cook them on the front. And the legs kept jumping out. But we ate them all. And there's a whole bunch of other ones that every spot in this town has a story. I mean, literally, every square foot has a story about it. And we did it.
And lived.
Yeah, we did.
You had two
Yes.
questions.
I have a question. Behind the medical center, there's a log cabin that they're saying was the bishop's storehouse. Is that true? Yes.
Yeah.
It moved there. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
moved there.
I was
know
gonna say.
that, But then the guy who was talking about it didn't act like he was really sure.
Yes.
You go inside it?
I went inside, you can see some lights.
And individuals and the names of people who run.
Yeah, but the guy that was there wasn't,
Very good on it.
well, he seemed a little wishy-washy.
There's so many stories. You just can't write. And Chris says, well, write them all down. He said,
Tell them, even if you don't write them.
Can somebody tell the story about Bill Rouch going under the road in that tunnel?
Lighting things on fire.
Yeah, the tumbleweeds.
When Dad was young, he and Greg Brockmore and a couple of other kids, there was a culvert under the road going up the canyon towards the park and the city offices. Well, that wasn't there. The city offices weren't up there at the time. And Dad and these friends would stuff the ends with sagebrush. And then they would climb inside and they would light it on fire. And one day Greg Brockmeyer and my dad were inside and they lit both ends on fire. And they quickly had to grab as best as they could at the tumbleweeds to pull them out so that Dad and Greg Brockmeyer could get out.
there is a story about the Cable Mountain. And Shelley told it to me. You ought to tell it.
That my great uncle was a teacher out to Orderville, and they brought their kids down on a field trip. And they came down the cable, and there was a mail drop. They didn't have to use the cable flat part. Anyway, and as he was explaining it, and the cable started to go up, the cable broke loose, and he saw it coming for his children, his class. So he pushed the children out of the way, and the cable took off his head right in front of his 5th grade child. one of his kids was in the class that when it happened. But he was able to save all of the children, but that he did lose his life on it.
But there's so many stories. Yes?
The house that I lived in for the last 45, 50 years was made with one of the cabins from the original park, lodge. And when Mother passed away a couple of years ago, my brother and sister sold those homes. And the person that bought it tore them down, and they should have been saved.
Pretty historic. Anyway, I'll turn it back to Chris, I guess, because we get going all night for this story.
We got one more person to tell a story, and Stan's going to tell it.
It's not really my story. It's Dennis Johnson. I talk with him all the time. And one of my favorite stories that he told me it's a great story. Whether it's true or not, you all have to decide. But he said that Rouch Cafe had the only telephone in
It's Dawn's phone.
in the town. And anytime that the phone would come in, Mr. Alwood would get one of the kids and say, hey, go out and tell Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so that there's a phone call. And this one time, Mr. Alwood said, Dennis, run over to where the Springdale Suites is now and tell so-and-so he's out there farming, tell him that he's wanted on the phone. So if this gentleman came in there, picked up the telephone, the operator said, long distance from Salt Lake, and he said, sure the hell is, put the phone down and went back to work.
I love Dennis. When Lyle and I pushed out our lot up there by where Carol and Betty Jean live, Dennis was telling me there's this big rock up on our property, and he goes, you know, the biggest rattlesnake I ever saw in my life was on that rock. And I'm like, don't tell me that. I'm bringing my child to live there. He just loved to give us, I don't know, he was just so much fun to have around and tell us fun stories.